The title of my presentation is Numbers, Words and Images, Material Culture in the Digital Era. So, yes, when in 2017, Factum Arte presented the so-called rematerialization of the stone sarcophagus of Seti I, the result of this impressive, and I would add probably rather expensive operation, met with the approval of a number of experts. And among the various comments, I think one was especially interesting and comes from the webpage of Digital Epigraphy. So talking about this type of operation, it noted that it's almost impossible to distinguish between original and copies, and therefore the experience is authentic for both scholars and tourists alike. And that such a process might allow scholars to study the monuments without interacting with the actual work of art. Now, the potential, I think, is clearly there. We have at our disposal new tools and new possibilities. And although many of the elements of the picture are known, their mutual relations have changed. And we need to look for a new order. And the first step to do so is to classify, actually to reclassify, both the elements and their relations. So in the past, just as in the present, the issues at stake are always the same. How to describe the material realm and the immaterial realm. And I'm not just talking about the digital realm, but also the religious or the symbolic realm, when I talk about immaterial realm, and how to deal with transformations. The thesis presented here today is that we should not confuse the object with its possible descriptions made by means of numbers, words, and images. And in order to discuss this thesis, I will refer to concepts coming from the ancient Greek philosophical thought that represents the basis of our modern Western philosophical framework. Now, what is happening is that the digital transformation is somehow blurring some traditional definitions and boundaries. And we found ourselves once more at one of those crucial points where we must change the way in which we describe the surrounding world. So the means at our disposals are numbers, words, and images. So let us start from numbers. So numbers may be used to describe. Now, this possibility has been used, of course, throughout the entire history of humankind. And the first sentence of the Rhind Mathematical Papyrus says that the document deals with accurate reckoning for inquiring into things and the knowledge of all things, mysteries and all secrets. Of course, these mysteries and secrets are not dramatic elements of a fiction, but simply refer to what we don't know. And that number can help us decipher. Now, descriptions may become predictive through calculations that add some sort of abstract dimension to the concept of description. Now, the issues corresponding to these two realms include problems of overlapping and overinterpretation. The first case might be exemplified by the first opinion that scholars formed on the calculations contained in Papyrus Reisner 1, where all the calculations involving the submultiple of the cubic qubit were classified as scribal errors. However, it was later discovered that the submultiple was not, as we would expect today, a small cubic palm, but was rather a 1 palm wide slice of cubic qubit. And in this way, all the calculations work perfectly well. Problems of overinterpretations, instead, may be found, for instance, in the evaluation of astronomical alignments of monuments. So these results might have been simply achieved by means of observations. There's no need to suppose that they were the result of incredibly complex calculations. Numbers might be used to create as well. So achievements include certainly reconstructions, for instance, digital elaborations. They may be placed in relation with the actual remains thanks to augmented reality. And then the still somehow vague realm of the metaverse, meaning the possibility to create completely virtual and immersive experiences. There's a lot of talking about it, experiments are being made. It will take some time before it can actually become an instrument of daily use. Now, issues that constitute the counterparts of these achievements are the growing difficulty to discern the real from fake and the detachment from materiality. The first translates into the difficulty in a virtual reconstruction to distinguish between original and added parts, and therefore to appreciate or evaluate the process that led to that result. The second, the detachment from materiality, is a fundamental characteristic, of course, of the metaverse, but may, however, hamper a full understanding of the material processes involved in the physical construction of the material objects, as the difficulties encountered during the Nova pyramid experiment demonstrated. Actually, the construction of pyramids is a typical case in which this discrepancy is quite evident. Whatever you imagined being possible on paper, when you have to push and pull heavy stones, and you have to deal with the physical weight of these stones, things end up always being somehow different from what you expected. So, moving to words, it is interesting how an issue addressed in the past is resurfacing now. In 5th century BC Athens, when writing started being used in the philosophical discourse, Socrates voiced his perplexities on the fixed nature of writing. In Plato's words, writing, Phaedrus, has this strange quality, and it's like painting. For the creatures of painting stand like living beings, but if one asks them a question, they preserve a solemn silence. And so it is with written words. You might think they spoke as if they had intelligence, but if you question them, wishing to know about their sayings, they always say only one and the same thing. Now, flash forward to the 21st century. And the dematerialization of written digital texts is reintroducing a dynamism that was actually lost for millennia. If you read the description of Wikipedia from their website, you can see that Wikipedia describes itself as, it has no firm rules. Wikipedia has policies and guidelines, but they are not carved in stone. That's very interesting because here we are in a place dedicated to people that made a huge effort to carve anything that they could in stone. Their content and interpretation can evolve over time. Wikipedia has advantages over traditional paper encyclopedias. It is not limited in space. It can keep growing as fast as people add to it. And then a paper encyclopedia remains static, whereas Wikipedia is dynamic. So what is happening, basically, is that in the digital era is allowing us to give back more prominence to the changing aspect of a textual description by incorporating the fluid characteristic of the verbal description into the fixed structure of the written description. Another case of, let's say, tidal flows that come and go concern the relationship between words and images. If hieroglyphs in particular retained their pictographic origins in a rather evident way, flash forward again to today, and we see a significant return of images to communicate beside words, but most of the time instead of words. Now, regardless how words are written anyway, words and images have always maintained an even deeper connection based on their being somehow complementary. As Aristotle noted 2,400 years ago, the soul never thinks without images. And the word used for images is phantasmata, indicating some sort of immaterial double. That's it. So moving to images. The relationship between the object and their images has been the subject, of course, of countless speculations over the millennia. And again, we may derive from the past the hints to deal with the present. Just as Plato wrote that representations are imitations once removed from the physical object and twice from the original idea, concerning the digital realm, We may now say that we must be ready to acknowledge the degree of separation between the digital model and the physical object. And as Aristotle wrote, one may produce imitations of either things as they were or are, or things as they are said or seem to be, or things as they should be. And seemingly, digital models must have a precise aim, be faithful to the appearance of the object, and in case of reconstructions, clearly illustrate the underlying de- and reconstruction processes that led to that result. Now, the current scenario appears to increase the gap between the objects and their images. Plato, in his allegory of the cave, wrote that all that we can normally see are shadows of shapes that reproduce ideas. Only those who free themselves from the chains that keep them at the bottom of the cave, that is, the philosophers, can reach the sunlight and contemplate the true beings, that is, the original ideas. On the other hand, our need to connect the digital immaterial world to the physical material world is clearly testified by the phenomenon of skeuomorphism, that is the use of images to describe a digital action that mimics its equivalent in the real world. This is the case of most of the computer and smartphone icons that refer to our analogic past, but sometimes also to our digital past. And I find a particularly funny case, the icon of the trash bin that makes a crunchy noise when it deletes the files and has been even turned into an environmental friendly recycling bin. It's interesting. So, where do we go from there? In Plato's myth, knowledge moves along a line linking idea to shape to shadow and vice versa. So it is possible to draw a parallel, to suggest a parallel. So just as ideas are unreachable but can be contemplated through philosophy, archaeological objects contain an unknown, apparently unreachable amount of information that can only be accessed through research. Research gives shape to immaterial descriptions by means of the tools at our disposal. So we have then reached the bottom of the cave with our plethora of immaterial descriptions. So from there we have two ways to get out. One is climbing back the cave, following the logic argument. The other is to take into account the empiric aspect of the objects. So by means of the categories defining its materiality, we can keep under control the differences existing between the material objects and the immaterial representations, as some categories do not coincide, and therefore avoid to confuse them. In this way, we can close the circle, going back to the original object with more information. And the circular movement can be repeated and again by building upon what has been learned in the previous round. So in order to be truly effective, researchers should be able to weave together into a single thread the open questions characteristic of the philosophical realm, so from the same starting point may provide different results, and the closed questions typical of the scientific realm, at the same starting point provides the same results. So in conclusion, material and immaterial aspects belong to a circular process of knowledge, in which each element plays a specific role that should not be confused. Starting and final point, in my opinion, will always be the object, as a constant source of both logic and empiric information, depending on the means that we adopt to investigate it. And the propelling force of this circular process is research, and its success will depend on our ability to combine the closed and open questions into one coordinated discourse. Thank you.